So hi again, everybody. Welcome to our fall wholesale virtual tasting. I'm Michael Torino, the Senior Vice President of Global Sales here at Ridge, and I'll be the moderator for today's tasting. I know you all are incredibly busy. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us and taste along with us today. We started these virtual tastings in the spring of 2012 and have hosted them every spring and fall since then to coincide with our spring and fall releases. It's kind of the best way to taste all the new releases, have some time with the winemakers here directly from production team on what happened in that vintage, their thoughts on the wine, and get a chance to taste everything. Oftentimes these wines are highly allocated and you don't always get a chance to taste them out in the market. So this really serves a great opportunity to do that. Our wines and tasting order for today will be the 2023 Grenache Blanc, the 2022 Pagani Ranch Zinfandel, 2022 Lytton Springs, 2021 Lytton Estate Petite Sirah, and we'll finish with the 2021 Monte Bello. So before we meet the panelists and jump into the tasting, just a few housekeeping and general announcements. We do, of course, use Zoom as our platform. Please introduce yourself in the chat, say hi. It's a great place to make general comments, give us your thoughts on the wine as we taste through. If you have questions, please use the Q&A function. The chat tends to move really fast as we get going, and the Q&A function ensures that the panelists get to see the questions. And as always, we'll do our best to answer as many live as we can as we go through the tasting. Couple notes on social media. We always enjoy seeing your photos from today's tasting. I know there's some really cool venues that we're hosting this in today. So please share those on social and tag us at Ridge Vineyards. And also, if you're not already following us on LinkedIn, please do. It's become an excellent place for trade news. Michaela's done a really nice job keeping that up to date with everything happening on the wholesale side, and it's become a great resource for us on communicating. I'd also like to add a few welcomes before we get started. First, to our two newest wholesale partners, Frederick Wildman, who's represented us in Metro New York for the past 53 years, now covers us full state in New York, and we're really thrilled to be with them and have them represent us in full state as they have in Metro for so many years. And also to Skurnick Wines and Spirits in Kentucky. They just kicked off with us, and we're really excited to be a part of that portfolio. And I can't wait to see what our business does in the Kentucky market there with them. They're both joining today for the first time, so thrilled to have you representing us and joining us. Also want to welcome in the regional team. They work so hard to make this virtual tasting a success every year, every spring and fall. It really hinges on them rallying their markets and being out there to participate and hosting this live with some of their markets. Tom Biasso is in New York City today with the Wildman team, so welcome, Tom. Poppy Monroe is in West Texas with the Southern Glazers folks. And Christina Donnelly has taken over the historic Lobo Theater in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She has the Southern Glazers folks and a group of accounts there with her. I think we could probably say that's officially the largest screen our virtual tasting has ever been on. So we've made it big time now. So thanks, Christina. I hope you're having fun there. And lastly, before we meet the panelists and start talking wine, it's a particularly special fall release for us. It's not every year we get to celebrate the 50th anniversary of a wine, and we get to do that today with the 2022 Lytton Springs. We'll talk a lot more about that when we get to the wine, including this great media event we just hosted a few weeks ago. And we're also going to conclude the tasting with a short video on the history of Lytton Springs. It's really an incredible video that we put together. We hope you'll like it as much as we do, and hear from Paul firsthand on how we first got started with Lytton Springs and how special of a place it is, and the rest of the production team on what it means today. So with that, we will go ahead and introduce our panelists for today. So joining us, John Olney, our head winemaker and COO at Ridge Vineyards. John, thanks for joining us. I know you're busy. You've got fruit coming in, right behind you as we speak.
Yep. Hi, everybody.
Dave Gates, our Senior Vice President of Vineyard Operations. Almost through another harvest, Dave.
Yep, we're making it. Hi, everybody.
And Shauna Rosenblum, our winemaker up at Lytton Springs. Welcome, Shauna.
Hi, everyone.
So before we start talking about the first wines here, just wanted to check in and do a quick harvest update. Dave, can you kick us off and let us know how it's going?
Yeah, it's going. So there's a cool movie out there, and the title fits this vintage perfectly. Everything, everywhere, all at once. That's pretty much how the vintage has gone. Yeah, let's see. We had really good rainfall this year, which was great for the vines. Everything grew really well. Um, and it was actually kind of starting a little bit late in the season. So I'd say a week behind normal, but we got warm weather starting in July. So kind of hot weather up in Sonoma, warm weather at Monte Bello, and that never really ceased. So the vintage really accelerated, I'd say, especially at Monte Bello. And so, yeah, everything just kind of came in starting with Contra Costa County, the few little bit of grapes that we buy there, Evangelo, Sandy Lane, Gonsalves, that was kind of typical. So mid-August. But then right on the heels of that, we started picking in Sonoma and didn't really stop until yesterday, when we finished up at Lytton Springs. And Montebello, likewise, was very early this year. I think this will be the first year in our 60 plus years history that we're going to finish Montebello in September. Um, that's never happened. Not, although I can't say that for sure, Mike. I'd have to go back and look at the records for 1977 and that drought to see if when the last grapes at Montebello were picked there. I know they picked a lot in September, but I think it went into October. So yeah, it's yeah, pretty crazy.
Wild, yeah. And John, you've been at Montebello primarily for this harvest. How's the fruit coming in? What are your thoughts on it initially?
Yeah, I mean the fruit looks great, but like David was saying, we're sort of accustomed to things coming in stages. So you start with Zinfandel, then when that's over, you move into Chardonnay, then you move into Cabernet, then you move into Merlot, and instead it's just we've got Zinfandel and Cabernet up on the crush pad. So there's, we've been working some long nights, and getting creative about how to find places to put all the wine. But especially in the from the fruit up in the mountain, the yields were a little lower than what we expected, but that's really just translated into super concentrated fruit. So I mean, the wines really are, I mean, they're just black as coal. I mean, I think we're going to have some really great material to work with.
Fantastic. Can't wait to taste them. And Shauna, same question for you. How's it looking at Lytton Springs as it's coming in?
Yeah, it kind of, the same story these folks are reporting. The flavor profile, the concentration, the structure of this vintage is really great. As Dave mentioned, the Sandy Lane Carignan out of Contra Costa County. For us, we pulled that in on August 21st, and it's already mallet complete, sulfured, and down to barrel. So,
Wow.
in less than a month. That feels really good. That's a real check mark. But yeah, we've had very pleasant weather. And as Dave said, we've had, a couple of years now of ample rainfall. And I think the vines are responding very positively. Everything coming out of Lytton Springs is just extremely high quality. But yeah, the weather has created an interesting dynamic where, as Dave said, we picked out of Lytton Springs yesterday, and our last pick was for rosé, because the Counoise, the Cinsault, and the Grenache just would not be rushed. They're like, I'm taking my time, giving these perfect flavors. So kind of backwards in that regard, but the flavor on everything is so good, beautiful acid. So looking forward to a really great vintage.
Excellent. That sounds great. Yeah, I can't wait to taste the wines up at Lytton either. It sounds really good all around, all around. So perfect. We'll dive into the wines now, and we'll start with the 2023 Grenache Blanc. And Dave, I'll kind of call on you to talk through this initially. This is year two of kind of what we internally call our super blend, as we blended the three vintages on it, and get your take on how that's coming together.
Yeah, Mike, I like super blend better than kitchen sink. So this is a combination of three vineyards that we've been working with for a while now. The first one I would say is Adelaida Vineyard. So that's on the western end in the Adelaida district. Even further west from there is a vineyard called Halta Ranch that we buy a little bit of Grenache Blanc from. And then our last one that are fairly young vines is the Ducey family, and that is Grenache Blanc and a little bit of Picpoul Blanc that we purchase, and soon to be Beurre Blanc he's planted a little bit for us there
That's
too. So
exciting.
yeah, we got all of 453 pounds of it this year, so it'll be a little
4 bottles
bit.
of wine.
Yeah, yeah. So this is a wine that I don't know. We feel that Grenache Blanc has found a really nice home in California, especially in the Central Coast, especially in the limestone soils that kind of surround Paso Robles, and that's where we see it being expressed really nicely. And you can make this wine in a lot of different styles. I think the style that we're shooting for is something that is a bit complex but not super serious, right? I mean, we do not want to make it like our Chardonnay, and it is not like our Chardonnay. And I think that the kind of secret sauce to this wine is the bit of Picpoul that we put in it, 10 or 15 or so percent. It really kicks up the acid on the Grenache Blanc and expresses itself on the nose a little bit too. It actually acts a little bit like Carignan does with Zinfandel. It pushes the notes of Grenache Blanc out, and then the peaches and whatnot that you can get some floral, and keeps it fresh and lively. So yeah, it's a great wine. I think that it's something that you could lay it down, but it tastes so good that I would say drink it in the first year or two or three, or something like that. So yeah, we're very happy with it. We're stoked to be working with these vineyards. I think it's a really good blend, a good mix, and yeah, we're looking forward to continuing. And this year it looks pretty good. We've got the last of that in this week on Wednesday.
Fantastic. And yeah, I had this wine out with me last week. I was in the market in upstate New York. And it's, as you all know, it's been a runaway success for us in the wholesale market. But last week, literally every account we tasted on it bought it. It was, we sold more of this than any other wine last week. And it really is, it just fits this, spot kind of in the alternative white section of California, where, there's just kind of a lot of boring wines, and this really stands out. I think a lot of it is that zippy acidity from the pick pool really carries the fruit. And John, a question for you on the 23 vintage. There's 2% Roussanne blended into it. And aside from giving me a couple extra cases to sell, what does that bring to the blend here?
So yeah, so the Roussanne, it comes from the Adelaida, and we've always been getting it. And Roussanne it's a grape that generally is a little lower in acid. Again, the reason why having the pick pool is important, and it brings a roundness to the wine. It kind of gives a little bit more weight to the palate. So it's a nice little addition in small amounts.
Got it. And we did have a question come in regarding the pick pool and which vineyard of the three that comes from. And that's primarily Fossil Creek and a little bit of Adelaida, if I'm not mistaken, Dave. Is that
Yeah,
right?
it's now all Fossil Creek. We're getting all the pick pool now from Fossil Creek.
Okay, perfect. Great. Yeah, it's really the 23 is showing fantastic. Excited to have this out there, based on kind of the success that we've seen. I just encourage people to taste as many people on it as you can. They're more often than not going to love it. So great. We can move on to the next wine. We'll get into our first red, and that's the 2022 Pagani Ranch. And Shauna, if I can call on you to kind of take us through this wine.
Sure. Pagani Ranch. I mean, for me, this is about as classic as Sonoma Valley Zinfandel blends get. For me, the aromatics in Sonoma Valley, there's always this really beautiful, almost kind of honeycomb note. I get it out of Pagani. I've gotten it from, Monte Rosso and several other vineyards in this appellation. But yeah, the kind of beautiful raspberry, strawberry, classic honeycomb. I think, this comes not only from the appellation, the soil, it's a cooler portion of, Sonoma County. So Pagani it's under fog until noon most days, which people don't realize. They hear Sonoma, they think warm. But this is a relatively cooler climate area. And the vines were planted, the earliest ones in the late 1800s, subsequent plantings through the early 1900s, and then some young vine replants around 2013 to 2018. And I think one of the beauties of Pagani is it's not only Zinfandel, but we have our Carignan, our Mataro, and Pagani has one of the most interesting layouts in an old vine vineyard. It has something I've never seen before, which is these isolated blocks of Teinturier vines. So we have several different blocks that are dedicated to not only Alicante Bouschet, but Grand Noir and Laine Noir, which are, Teinturier varieties, or when we have red pulp, red skin. And so it gives this very dark color to the wine, also helps add structure. And it's just one of the healthiest old vine vineyards I've ever seen. I mean, Dino and his family have been farming this land for generations. They really understand the vines growing there and, the nutritional needs of the vines, the watering needs of the vines. And as a result, the vines are very healthy looking. I mean, some of them are over 7 feet tall, which is pretty wild to see, especially if you juxtapose that against a place like Contra Costa County, where they have vines planted around the same age, but they're, 1.5 or 2 feet off the ground. They're like little zin bushes. So it's very interesting to see that. And Pagani is just, it's one of a kind in that regard. 2022, we had weather that was not unlike this year, honestly, pretty moderate summer. It wasn't until September 5th that we had a heat wave where it hit 115 degrees. Luckily, given the location of this vineyard and the moisture saturation of the soil, these grapes were actually able to hang on the vine through that heat wave and come in unaffected, which we were so grateful for. I mean, when you see 115 degrees in the forecast, we all get very, very scared. But luckily, this vineyard had what it took to protect its fruit. And as a result, we picked this Zinfandel mid-September, and it was around 23.5, 24 bricks. So I think we were at the right part of the growing season when we saw that heat wave, that, we were safe. Dave, you've been working with this vineyard since what, 1991, and John's worked at this vineyard for so many years too. 2022, I kind of couldn't ask for more ideal conditions from this vineyard, and I'm absolutely loving the way that it's expressing itself in the glass right now.
Yeah, agreed. It's really, I mean, it's just jumping out of the glass, and that, there's that great acidity to it, but there's almost like this tropical note that's coming out of it that's really interesting.
Yeah,
totally.
It's a great vineyard. I mean, it really is one of the classic old vine vineyards of California.
Yeah, and I'm glad, Shauna, that you talked about Alicante Bouschet, because that's the first question whenever I present this wine to somebody. They look at it and they say, Alicante Bouschet, what's that? And being a Teinturier varietal, it's so interesting and in a higher percentage, because they just, you don't see it in other vineyards often, particularly at this high of a percentage.
It's absolutely true. I mean, in classic field blends, we see it interplanted all the time, but to the tune of like 1%. Like I said, I've never ever in an old vine vineyard seen an isolated block like that. It's very, very cool.
Yeah, it makes this wine so unique. And we'll move on to the next wine, and this is a real special release, John. It's the 2022 Lytton Springs, our 50th anniversary. We'll show the video at the end of the tasting today, but you guys hosted a pretty big media event a couple weeks ago, and I'll ask you to kind of take us through this wine and that event, and what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so 1972 was the first Lytton Springs that Ridge made. It was actually the first time anyone had made a single vineyard of wine from the vineyard. And so yeah, it's pretty special to, 50 years later, still be making wine from that vineyard. So I actually came to California wine sort of kind of through the back door. I started in the import business. So, I could name all 13 varietals from Chateauneuf to Pop and every Grand Cru in Burgundy, but I really didn't know anything about California wine when I came to California in the early 90s. And a friend said, "Oh, you got to taste Ridge." And we went up to Lytton Springs, and I remember I had the 91 Lytton Springs, and it was the first wine I had really had from California where I said, "Wow, this is really complex. This is great wine." So that's, I guess a little extra special for me because this is really the wine that kind of drew me in, and one of the reasons I ended up here at Ridge. But yeah, we had a really great tasting. Like Mike said, a few weeks back, we tasted back through all of the decades. We chose a wine from each decade, and had the 22, correct me, Shauna, I think the 13, and I know we had 99,
09,
09,
and
and
84 and 74.
and the 74. So, and it was really incredible how well the 74 and the 84 were still holding up. So, it's certainly, I think, a testament to the fact that, when Zinfandel is grown in certain places, in the right places, and we certainly think Lytton Springs is one of those, with the right field blend mix, right soil, it really can transcend what I think we normally think about Zinfandel, just sort of being this jammy, fruit forward kind of wine that doesn't really age. So, yeah, so pretty special.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so turning to 2022, we were still in the drought era, and so slightly lower yields, but we had pretty moderate weather throughout the growing season. We did get into some heat waves at the towards the end of the growing season in August and early September, but some nice concentrated fruit. I think you really see the benefits of the field blend. You do have the fruit coming in from the Zinfandel, but then you have that nice dark richness, nice structure, the tannin from the Petite Sirah, and then the Carignan, which really is a critical part. In fact, we had a little bit more Carignan to in the blend in 2022, and I think it really brings some nice brightness and acidity to the wine. So it's it's really drinking great right now, but I think it's something that definitely will reward in the cellar as well. And Shauna, this was the first wine at Lytton Springs you really worked with, so I don't know if you want to say a few words.
Yeah. Well, I'm, first of all, being able to work with this vineyard and, learning kind of the Ridge way from you, John, during the 22 vintage. I'm very grateful that we had such an uneventful growing year. Pretty easy weather, kind of like, hey, this is ready to pick, let's pick it. Yeah, I've been a Ridge fan and club member for a long time, and Lytton Springs is always one of my favorites. So having the opportunity to work with these vines is incredible. I think something else that came out of that 50th anniversary tasting was, Liz Tosh, MW, she ended up writing an article for Forbes about why Lytton Springs and Geyserville in particular, as they age, can almost kind of mimic aged Bordeaux. And I think it's an interesting concept that, John, you just started talking about, which was all of these interplanted varieties, the power of Zinfandel co-fermented with Carignan, Petite Sirah, Alicante Bouschet Mataro. The field blend really does transcend any one varietal. And as it ages, that acid, you know, the pH component, the savory notes, the primary fruit turns into tertiary characteristics, and you get this otherness. It's not Zinfandel. It's not a field blend. It's this other wine that, you said it, John, it transcends the varietal. And I thought that was a really interesting concept, and tasting the 84 and the 74 Lytton Springs really supported that. I mean, I couldn't believe how much vitality those vintages still had left. But yeah, making the 2022, I'm also really grateful that you didn't tell me this was the 50th anniversary of Lytton Springs as my first vintage. But it was a lot of fun to craft this wine. I had a blast making it, and I am so proud and so grateful to have this in the glass right now and be sharing it with all you folks.
Yeah, you absolutely should be, Shauna. I mean, it's really, Lytton picked a heck of a vintage to show off, being its 50th. It's really impressive and incredible. And I'm glad you talked about co-fermentation, because that was a question that came up in the chat. It's always so interesting on these old field blends to talk about that co-fermentation and the structure that it adds, and how it just really makes a wine of place as opposed to a variety-based wine. It's such a difference.
Right.
And the media tasting, we've seen a tremendous amount of press come out already about it. I mean, there's been a Wine Spectator article. You mentioned the Forbes article. JancesRobinson.com has an article on it. The Wine Advocate's about to put one out. So it's really great to see the media celebrating the 50th along with us. And I guess, John, my invitation got lost in the mail on that tasting. I didn't see you get it. So. All kidding aside, though, it's really an honor to sell this and represent this vintage. It's really incredible. And we'll move on. We'll stay in the same Lytton estate, but we'll move on to the 2021 Lytton Estate Petite Sirah now. And Shauna, if you can kind of take us through this wine. And a question that I get, just to kind of put this out there for you, that I get all the time is, so it's from the Lytton Estate. It's 100% Petite Sirah. Why is it a separate wine and not part of the Lytton Springs blend? So if you can kind of weave that into your conversation on the wine, it'd be great.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Petite Sirah is it's an interesting one. I have a long history with Petite Sirah. My father loved to make Petite Sirah. My dad was Kent Rosenblum. My family founded Rosenblum Cellars back in the 1970s. And my dad, when blending with Zinfandel, his magic words were always, "I think this needs a little petite." And, making wine with John, John has said the same thing to me a few times. And I think it's sort of the magic of the Zinfandel, field blend. Obviously, we talked about Carignan, Petite Sirah. But, Petite Sirah on its own, it's a savory wine. It's a wine that, is food friendly when made in the style that we make it. Grown here in Dry Creek Valley. We have some older Petite Sirah vines, primarily younger stuff, 30 to 40 years and younger than that. Petite Sirah vines don't generally live as long as Zinfandel vines. But what you get from it is just a dark, inky, concentrated wine. And you can push a Petite Sirah too far. I mean, it can get very tannic, almost to the point of like Tannat, or one of these varietals where it's like, whoa, that's abrasive. But one of the things that we really work on in making Petite Sirah is tannin management. So I'm tasting through the tanks every single day, and as soon as I taste that structure that we're looking for, we pull it off the skins, because we don't want to push the tannin too hard. We really want the tannin and the acid to be in balance. And I think our Lytton Estate vineyard, we have a great picture right here, is just one of the top-notch places in Dry Creek to grow Petite Sirah. The soil, the climate, Petite Sirah and Syrah are really, they're happy campers over at our Lytton West vineyard. John, you want to say a little bit about the Petite?
Yeah, sure. So, originally, when we purchased the Lytton western portion of the vineyard back in 1995, we decided to plant a few pure blocks of Petite Sirah The idea being that in any given vintage, if we didn't think that the Petite Sirah that was already sort of baked into the field blend of Lytton Springs was enough, we could add a little bit. But making it on its own, we quickly realized, just especially at Lytton West, what an outstanding place it is to be growing Petite Sirah. So we were so impressed with the wine, that we felt that, this is a standalone wine. This is something that really expresses the place. And in 2009, we made our first national release of the Petite Sirah. So, it's interesting. I mean, the more we, more experience we get with that part of the vineyard, it does seem to be a place where not only Petite Sirah, but Syrah itself seems to do really, really well. So that's Dave, you want to say anything about that? I mean, in terms of the soils and, why is it that Petite works
Yeah,
so well there? Do we know?
yeah, who knows? It's one of those things. No, I think that it is less sensitive than Zinfandel to the high acid soil, so the low pH soils that we have at Lytton West. And I think in Zinfandel, that's expressed by lower yields and a little bit higher pH. Petite Sirah doesn't seem to have that problem. It just kind of cruises in pretty nicely at a respectable pH, and always has good concentration. It's a funny variety. It's similar to Carignan in that it is quite susceptible to sunburn when the grapes are still green. But as soon as they turn, as soon as they hit veraison, it's bulletproof. It doesn't really respond to high temperature like Zinfandel does at harvest. So it just, where Zinfandel can skyrocket in ripeness, Pat's just kind of cruises along. So that helps quite a bit too.
And Dave, we had a question come in, really two questions. How big are Petite Sirah berries compared to Zinfandel was the first part of it, and then the second part was what Petite Sirah is, kind of the connection to Syrah.
Oh, sure. So Petite Sirah berries are smaller than Zinfandel berries, but the clusters can be pretty big. They have a genetic variant thing called fasciation, where they kind of split in doubles. And sometimes you'll get, I call them hammerheads. You get a cluster that's actually two clusters together, and it can be like 2 pounds. I mean, it's like a table grape. But they're tiny berries tightly packed together, but big clusters. And Petite Sirah is also known as Durif, and it was a cross that was discovered in the 1880s by a Dr. Durif down in the south of France. And it is a cross of the two parents of Petite Sirah, or Syrah, and then another kind of obscure variety called Pelersan. And in Petite Sirah vineyards to this day in California, you will find all three varieties. It would be predominantly Petite Sirah, but then you'll also see some of these Pelersan vines, and then the Syrah vines, which are the two parents. So it's kind of cool. And back in the 1880s and 1890s, when it got a name for itself in Napa and the North Coast, it was a blend of those three, predominantly Petite Sirah, though.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a question we get all the time. So thanks for clarifying that and explaining it a little bit. And it's interesting. We pour this all the time for people, and the expectation is always it's going to be this huge monster, and they kind of like get ready to taste it, and they taste it, and it's really fairly approachable early on. I mean, we know from our experience it'll age forever, but it really is pretty approachable early on.
Yeah, and I think, that's also, we can also attribute that to the acid profile, right? Because since we're not pulling all the tannin out of it, it's pretty balanced, but the acid is there too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I also agree, or I also would like to say that, so the fruit on Petite Sirah, I wouldn't say it's nondescript, but it's just kind of grapey. It's doesn't have it's not a dominant grape varietal like Zinfandel or Syrah, varietal character anyway. But it can age so well. I remember a few years ago, I was on a panel at Roan Rangers, and I was pouring the O2 Petite Sirah, which is the first year we made a separate Lytton West, Lytton Springs Petite Sirah, Lytton Estate Petite Sirah. And I think that was in like 2016 or something, and everybody thought that it was like 2 years old because it just ages so beautifully and it still stays fresh. So it's a remarkable wine that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, part of that's the acidity that just keeps it fresh as it ages and yeah, keeps it lifted. Um, Excellent. All right. Thank you. We'll move on to our final wine, to the 2021 Montebello. And John, if I can have you, kind of start us off on this wine and talk to it.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, 21, 21, we were really, I mean, we had very little rainfall. So, I think we knew going into harvest that the vines were going to be pretty stressed out. And they reacted by setting a very small crop, really small berries. And right there, right when as we came up to harvest, we got this heat wave that pushed everything to full ripeness pretty quickly. So it was a scurry to get all the grapes off the vine. But the result were these wines that had excellent acidity, lots of color, great acid, and a lot of tannin. I mean, the biggest challenge for 21 was really tannin management, because it was really easy to it was you're crushing something that's mostly seeds and skins. There's not that much liquid there. So but I think it's really in the end it's really come out to be a very tightly wound wine. I think it's going to age beautifully. And they're really over time, as it softens, I think it's going to be a wine that'll have a great elegance, but a lot of longevity.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. I mean, the structure I mean, obviously very young right now, but the structure is so intense on it. And I know on the back label, you kind of noted, as we always do, age for 20 to 25 years. I think you could have went 50 on this one, and I would have taken the over. It's
Yeah,
going to age forever.
we like to underpromise, overdeliver. So.
Exactly. And we did have a question come in regards to the oak regimen on Montebello versus the other wines. So, John, if you can speak to
Yeah.
that.
So Montebello is the only wine that we age in 100% new oak, and it's all well. It's almost all American oak. We do usually experiment a little bit with 3 or 4% French oak, um, and it's really um, for a wine to really absorb 100% new oak is says a lot about Montebello. Because you definitely the oak is very present when it's young, but after 10 years, certainly by 20 years, it's completely incorporated. And it's interesting thing, because I when I first joined Ridge, I hadn't had any experience with American oak. And but that's what Ridge has been using since the beginning. And what I find with the American oak, at least with the Coopers that we use, is I feel it it almost adds this sort of a savory quality to the mouthfeel that I think is actually important, contributor to the overall flavor profile of the wine. So yeah, it's pretty special. I think what's really interesting, I always like talking to Paul about it, because Paul's feeling was, in the early 70s, when a lot of wineries in California were, there was everyone kind of wanted to make their wine like Lafite, and be the first winery that someone said, hey, that's as good as Lafite or Margaux. So, if you're going to try to do that, why not use the same barrels that they do? So, everyone was using French oak, and Paul just put his fist down and said, our wine doesn't need French oak, and we're not trying to make a copy Bordeaux. So, I mean, I really respect that, because, if you think about it, the Ridge was pretty alone in in the use of American oak certainly in the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've always loved that kind of saying that he has. Back then he kind of felt like if you want to drink imitation Bordeaux, just drink the real thing. And, we're not making imitation Bordeaux. So it's really something we've kind of hung our hat on and have been really proud of. And it, makes Monte Bello distinctly California.
Yeah.
And Dave, so could you talk a little bit about the 2021 kind of growing season at Monte Bello and what was going on that year? I know that was what, your 32nd year?
Yeah, something like that. 33rd, actually.
Mhm.
33rd vintage, I should say. And I made it through that one too. So 2021 was a drought year, and we've gone through multiple drought years in California. It's a cyclical thing. But 2021 was unique in my experience in that we didn't get any spring rain. So usually, for everybody in the Midwest and the East Coast, California is very much a Mediterranean climate, even more Mediterranean than the Mediterranean. We get up most of our rain, most of our precipitation in the winter months. So December, January, February are the wettest months. And all summer long, basically, May on, it's pretty dry. June, especially, June on. And when we have a drought year, we don't have a lot of rain in those winter months, which is, like I say, that happens. We had one from 2012 to 2017 or 2016. So we're used to those, but what usually happens is we get these nice rains that come in the spring when the vines are just growing or either just started growing or just after they've pushed bud. And those rains are immediately taken up by the vines, and they help get them through the dry summers. In 2021, we didn't have that. So the vines were stressed because they didn't get any winter rain. So the roots weren't really growing much in the wintertime. They couldn't explore the soil and take advantage of that lack of winter rain. And then they didn't have anything in the spring, so they just didn't grow. So in fact, John was saying that not a lot of berries or not a lot of grapes. I mean, and in fact, we ended up dropping probably half the crop at Monte Bello because we were more worried about the health of the vines than that year's crop, and so that made the vintage even that much smaller. But it was crucial in that so that we could keep those vines alive so that they could produce in 2022 and on. And I think in Monte Bello we got like 12 inches of rain, and usually we get 35. And the last couple of years we were over 80 inches in 2023, and last year we totaled 64 up at the top. So a lot less than what we're normally used to, and that pushed everything to the extreme. And it was I'm glad the wine is really good, but I don't want to do that again. I would prefer not to have another year like that.
No, and the resulting wine is fabulous. It's really an extraordinary Monte Bello. The challenging part is there's not much of it, but we'll hopefully get through that in the next couple of years as we get into the 23 and we have a higher production with all that rainfall. And the response to this wine has been fantastic already. We already have.
Good.
It's so good, right? And we already have 6 scores of 95 or higher on this wine, including a 100-point score. So congratulations to everybody at Ridge for really making a spectacular wine. And one other kind of fun note on Monte Bello in general, not just this vintage, we really started this, the prior vintage was changing the packaging on Monte Bello and going from the old heavy wooden box to this really beautiful corrugated cardboard box with the corn foam insulation. And it was a radical departure of what luxury brands generally do with their flagship wine. But we wanted to create something that was both sustainable and still felt luxurious. And we of course created it and put it out there, hoping everybody would feel the same way. And I'm thrilled to say that we've won 2 PAC Design Awards for this. We won the 3rd place award from the judges. And the 1st place award from the people, the ones who matter, voted this 1st place for the best sustainable package for 2024. So, kudos to everybody at Ridge again on this for not just creating a great box, but also creating a box that's about 1/3 the weight than those heavy wooden boxes. And it really, as we move, towards our mission zero here, this really is a big impact because we ship this wine all over the world. So pretty exciting.
Great job, Mike.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, it was a fun project to work on. It took a lot of different directions, but ultimately, thrilled with where we landed on it. So that was our final wine for today, but we do have a special video that we're going to share with everybody. We'll say our goodbyes as a group here, and then everybody can please stay on and watch this video with us. We really put a lot of effort into this video. I think it's pretty special and really highlights and does Lytton Springs justice for its 50th vintage. So John, Shauna, Dave, thanks for joining us and for presenting today. I know you've got fruit coming in the back door and you guys are really busy, and appreciate the time. I know everybody enjoys hearing from you directly. Thanks to all the viewers and the regional team, Murphy, Ryan on the back end of this, doing the presentation. And we'll see you again in the spring, but stay tuned and enjoy the Lytton 50th.
Mm-hmm.
Bye,
Bye, everyone. Right from the beginning, the philosophy was to champion single vineyards, special places where the soil, the microclimate, and the grape varietal were perfectly matched. Lytton Springs is one of those places. Paul Draper first met Dick Sherwin, who owned this vineyard back in 1972.
It was raining, and I pulled into the parking lot, and there was a big Cadillac with the big fins, and walked into the tasting room, which was a little tiny counter, and there was a guy standing there, and next to him was this very attractive woman with furs, and just, so out of place in this funky little tasting room that sold gallons and half gallons of wine. Good wine, I mean, really, my God, right up there. Turns out that this guy, his name was Dick Sherwin. I said, well, I'm Ridge Vineyards, and I was looking around for old vines. He said, oh, Ridge, fantastic. He said, listen, I just bought a vineyard just, less than a mile away or a mile away from here. So we went over to his place, which was Lytton Springs. I looked out over the vines there in the valley and up on the hills, where the hills then were beautifully complete. And of course, middle of winter, so that these guys looked like Greek soldiers, in formation. And I said, well, we'll take it. And he said, okay, I'd love to sell you the grapes. That was in '71, the winter. And so the next year, we took it and made the '72 Lytton Springs, and it lived up to everything that we would expect. Our contract from '72 on was based on a handshake. And in those days, handshakes in Northern California, at least, were sacrosanct. They were more important than a contract. Those years of '72 through '76, the Lytton Springs was the most consistent and simply one of the highest quality. Now, fast forward to 1990, we had succeeded in taking over the lease at Geyserville, and we're making it an estate wine. We heard that Lytton Springs was for sale. So we got together and said, okay, we're gonna buy this. So in 1990, we were able to buy Lytton. From that point on, we started making the wines and became ever more precise in what we were able to do. Two old friends came to me and said, there's somebody we would like you to interview. And I said, I'd love to. And so John came up and we sat down. And I would say within 15 minutes, maybe less, it was absolutely clear to me that I would hire this guy. And at the end, I said, John, I'd like to offer you a job as an assistant winemaker.
When I first came to California and started looking for work as a winemaker. I had just come from doing internships in France and specifically in Burgundy. As I tasted wines over and over, I just kept finding that Zinfandel just seemed to be this perfect match. Every time I turned my head, I was finding these different expressions from different parts of California. It really intrigued me. That's what gave me the itch to keep after it. When I joined Ridge in '96, I was working down at Monte Bello with Paul Draper. And then in 1998, I started coming up here to Lytton Springs. And then in '99, oversaw the construction of the new Straw Bale Winery so that when we finally finished it in 2003, we could full-time be making the majority of our Zinfandels right here on site. The idea to build a Straw Bale Winery was actually Paul's. And when we sat down with the architects and said that we want to build an 18,000 square foot straw bale building with 18-foot walls, their jaws dropped because no one had ever built a straw bale structure of that proportion. And it took quite a while just to find someone willing to stack straw bales and weigh them down with big cement buckets and go out in the vineyard and shovel a bunch of dirt and mix it with sand and then put some straw in it and make this sort of adobe that is what the walls are plastered with. So it was a really unique experience to go through. And straw, of course, is a renewable resource. We have solar panels on the roof, so we're producing about 2/3 of our electricity here on site. So we're looking at what we can do to really be responsible stewards of the earth. Building a winery made of straw bales, which is covered in earth that's simply taken out of the vineyard, it really makes sense. It's kind of a continuum. After all, what is wine, right? Wine is this juice, it's like liquid earth that comes from the vine that we're able to just transform into something that's delicious, that can be shared, and really connects us. What's really special about Lytton Springs, in part because of that field blend, but we also think in part because of the soil and also the lower yields from old vines, it's one of those few Zinfandel-based wines that really ages beautifully.
The Lytton one is more tannic. Part of that is Petite Sirah, part of that is the different soils. So it takes longer to come around. We release it typically later, only because it really begins to show its depth and its individuality with time.
As we increased our commitment in terms of building a winery here and kind of consolidating most of our Zinfandel vineyards to Sonoma County, we've been able to develop a terrific team. And today we have our viticulturist, Mauro Maldonado, who looks after all the vineyards up here in Sonoma County, and Shauna Rosenblum, who joined us in 2022. Shauna comes from a history, a family, the Rosenblums. When I see that 50th anniversary on a bottle of Lytton Springs, it just reminds me of all of the vintages, all of the hard work, all of the effort that's gone into all of the wines at Ridge, and the teamwork, the energy, and the passion for great wine.